It's something I've been observing, and maybe you have too, this real uh, evolution in how we see the Indian diaspora. It used to feel like the focus was, well, mostly on cultural connections, right? Sharing traditions across borders.
Mm-hmm.
But lately, it feels like there's this like undeniable surge in their political presence on the world stage.
That's a really good point. It's almost as if a switch has flipped, particularly if we look back to, say, around 2014. There's been this noticeable intensification in the political engagement
Right.
of the Indian diaspora, and it's become this really compelling dimension of India's interactions globally.
Exactly. We've been looking into this, trying to understand what's driving it and what the real implications are. So for this deep dive, our aim is to really dissect the core factors fueling this shift
Yeah.
and get a clearer picture of its significance.
Absolutely. And when we think about this shift, one of the most immediate contrasts that comes to mind is just the style of engagement we see now compared to, earlier periods.
Yeah. Oh, completely. It's like comparing a quiet diplomatic reception to a full-blown stadium concert. I remember reading about state visits from decades past. Very formal, very buttoned down, maybe a low-key meeting with a handful of community reps.
Right, very controlled.
But what we witness now, particularly with Narendra Modi's engagement since 2014, it's just a completely different ballgame. We're talking massive rallies filling entire stadiums.
Yeah.
The energy feels more like a rock show than, well, a typical political gathering.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating is the spectacle of it all. It feels very carefully constructed. Think about those images. Packed stadiums, just reverberating with these enthusiastic chants. And you even have the leaders of the host nations making these prominent appearances.
Yeah, standing right there.
It's a powerful form of communication, isn't it? Not just for the diaspora members who are there, but also for audiences back in India and, well, the wider international community too. It kind of begs the question, what message is being sent and how are these different groups actually receiving it?
Precisely. And it's not just spontaneous enthusiasm, is it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really strikes me that these events seem incredibly well choreographed.
Oh, definitely.
From the moment the delegation lands, those large organized welcomes right at the airport, down to these specific slogans echoing through the stadiums, there's a real sense of, like, strategic planning.
Yeah, a lot of thought goes into it.
And the way the Indian media covers these events, it's wall-to-wall coverage, almost like a major national holiday or something.
It's almost a deliberate projection, maybe, of national strength and global reach. But to really grasp why this particular approach resonates so strongly now, it's probably important to take a step back
Okay.
and look at the historical journey of the Indian diaspora itself. Because it's not a new thing, obviously, and its composition and influence have, evolved significantly over time.
That's right, because it's not just one big homogenous group, is it?
Yeah.
There are distinct waves of migration, each with its own story.
Exactly. The earliest major wave post-independence involved the descendants of indentured laborers, people taken to various parts of the British Empire, places like Mauritius, Guyana, Fiji. These communities often faced immense challenges, but they've persevered, built these vibrant cultures. Then, in later decades, especially from the mid-20th century onwards, we saw this significant outflow of professionals, doctors, engineers, academics, often highly educated individuals seeking opportunities in English-speaking Western countries.
The U.S., U.K., Canada.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have the oil boom of the 1970s. That led to a large and really diverse wave of workers migrating to the Gulf states, construction workers, servant staff, professionals, a whole mix.
And over time, these diverse communities have really established a foothold, haven't they? They've contributed significantly, economically, socially, in their adopted countries. And crucially, they've started to wield political influence.
Yeah, that's key.
We're seeing more and more individuals of Indian origin not just participating in politics, but actually entering mainstream politics in their new homes. Mayors, MPs, even cabinet ministers in some cases.
And that growing political capital, in their adopted countries, that's a crucial factor. As the diaspora's voice and influence have increased locally, it's only natural that political parties back in India have started paying closer attention.
Makes sense.
It's no longer solely about cultural ties or sending money home.
Yeah.
There's a recognition of the potential political leverage the diaspora can offer.
How so?
Well, whether it's through votes where overseas citizens actually have the right to vote in Indian elections, or financial contributions to campaigns, or even just the positive image and credibility these well-established communities can project back onto India, it all adds up.
Which then raises a really interesting and maybe slightly awkward question. Who's actually footing the bill for these massive diaspora events?
Ah, yes.
Because staging those huge stadium rallies with all the lights, sound performances, that can't be cheap.
That's where things become a little less clear-cut and perhaps more intriguing. There was actually an attempt back in 2024 by Commodore Lokesh Batra. He filed a right to information, an RTI application, trying to ascertain the expenses incurred by Indian missions, the embassies and consulates, in hosting these events during Prime Minister Modi's foreign visits.
And what came back? Did they get clear answers?
Well, the responses seemed to paint a bit of a mixed picture, didn't they?
Yeah, that's what I gathered.
The Indian mission in Abu Dhabi, for instance, they stated that the Al Modi event there was entirely financed by the Indian community residing in the UAE.
Which, given the size and economic strength of the Indian diaspora in the Gulf, that sounds plausible.
It's certainly plausible, but then the response from Moscow regarding a similar event was, well, less forthcoming. They acknowledged spending a pretty substantial sum, 1.87 crore rupees, which is over 200,000 US dollars.
Well, okay.
But they didn't provide any detailed breakdown of where those funds actually went. So this lack of transparency naturally leads to more questions about the financial side. What are the implications, of different funding models? Is it community-led, state-funded, a mix?
It also makes you think about the sheer logistics involved.
Yeah.
I mean, when a high-profile Indian leader arrives in a foreign country, you immediately see these enthusiastic crowds, the chanting, the banners. It's hard to imagine that level of mobilization happening completely organically every single time, is it?
You're right. It's likely a combination of things. Genuine enthusiasm, absolutely, but probably also very strategic event management.
Right.
While the Indian embassies undoubtedly play a crucial role, securing permissions, coordinating security with the host nation, the basic framework.
In official stuff.
Exactly. But the actual mobilization of thousands of people, that likely involves significant groundwork within the diaspora communities themselves, leveraging their own internal networks, community organizations, social media, communication channels, all to ensure a strong turnout.
And the structure of these rallies, it tends to follow a pretty consistent pattern, doesn't it? We saw it at Madison Square Garden in New York way back in 2014.
That was kind of the first really big one of this new era.
And then the Howdy Modi event in Houston, famously with President Trump sharing the stage. And more recently in Sydney, with the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese there as well. These are major spectacles. They get huge media attention, both in India and internationally.
Absolutely. They are meticulously crafted events. Every element, it seems, from the cultural performances showcasing Indian heritage,
The dancers, the music.
to the carefully orchestrated seating arrangements, even the anticipated responses from the audience. It all seems designed to create this powerful, lasting impression. And having those prominent figures from the host country there really elevates the event's profile, doesn't it? It underscores the importance being placed on this diaspora engagement.
And the message delivered at these rallies, it also seems to have a consistent thread running through it from what I've seen.
Yes, there's often a narrative that highlights India's journey of transformation, frequently contrasting what's presented as a period of challenges or stagnation before 2014 with the current narrative of rapid progress, increasing global influence, India taking its rightful place on the world stage.
And the diaspora's role in that.
That's central. There's invariably this emphasis on the vital contributions of the diaspora to this journey. It reinforces their sense of connection, their importance to the nation-building project back home. They're positioned as partners in this progress.
It's interesting, though, that even political leaders from the opposition in India, like Rahul Gandhi, have also started to engage with the diaspora in a similar style during their overseas visits.
That's true.
Even if their political messaging is obviously different, the format, the large gatherings, the direct address seems to be catching on across the board.
Precisely. It suggests a broader recognition, doesn't it, across the political spectrum in India of the diaspora's significance. This direct, large-scale engagement isn't seen as a niche activity anymore. It's become like an integral component of India's political outreach on the global stage.
So the core point really crystallizes then. The Indian diaspora has undergone this significant transformation. It's evolved into a substantial political force with a growing influence that goes way beyond just cultural exchange.
That's a very accurate assessment, I think. And while opinions might vary on the style and the effectiveness of what's been termed diaspora diplomacy.
Yeah, some people love it, some are maybe a bit skeptical of the theatrics.
Exactly. Some admire the impact, others might view the whole spectacle with a degree of skepticism. But the undeniable reality is that this approach has had a significant and arguably game-changing effect on how India engages with its global community.
And it prompts some really compelling questions as we look ahead, doesn't it? Like,
Right.
will the diaspora primarily continue to function as just an extension of domestic Indian politics,
Yeah.
echoing the debates back home?
Or
Or will we see the development of a more independent political voice emerging from these globally dispersed communities, one that reflects their own unique experiences and priorities in their adopted countries?
that's the critical juncture to watch, isn't it? As these diaspora communities mature further, become even more deeply integrated into the political landscapes of, say, the US, Canada, the UK. Their political priorities and concerns might increasingly reflect their local realities.
Hmm.
And this could potentially lead to a more nuanced, perhaps even diverse, set of political perspectives within the diaspora, which might not always align perfectly with the prevailing political narratives coming out of India at any given time.
It's certainly a dynamic situation. Fascinating to watch unfold. But one thing seems pretty clear, right?
What's that?
The next time a high-ranking Indian leader undertakes a major foreign visit, we can probably anticipate another one of these large-scale diaspora events. Regardless of what you or I might think about their merits, it just appears to have become a standard element of international engagement now.
Indeed. It seems baked into the strategy. This phenomenon is likely to keep shaping the contours of India's foreign policy and its relationship with the global community for the foreseeable future.
Well, this has been a truly insightful deep dive into the evolving political role of the Indian diaspora. Thanks for exploring all these facets with me.
My pleasure. It's a constantly evolving and, yeah, incredibly important area to understand.
And thank you for joining us on this deep dive. As we wrap up, maybe consider this. With the increasing political engagement of the Indian diaspora, what are the broader implications, not just for India, but for their adopted countries as well? How might this interconnected global network of influence shape international relations and maybe even domestic policies across the world in the years to come? Definitely something to keep in mind.